Most people don't realize the moment their life starts being controlled by a number. It doesn't happen when they check their credit score for the first time. It happens much earlier. It happens when a landlord quietly rejects their application without explanation. When a car loan gets approved, but at a shocking interest rate. When a job offer disappears after a background check that included credit history, and suddenly, life feels harder. But no one tells you exactly why. That's the power of credit scores in America. They don't announce themselves. They don't argue with you. They just decide. Imagine this. You're doing everything you think you're supposed to do. You work. You pay bills. You try to stay responsible. Maybe you made one mistake years ago. A late payment. A medical bill you couldn't afford. A credit card you maxed out during a hard time. You moved on. Life moved on. But your credit score didn't. It remembered. And now years later, that number still follows you. Quietly, invisibly, everywhere. In America, a credit score isn't just about borrowing money. It's about trust. It's about how institutions judge your worth without ever knowing your story. They don't see why you missed that payment. They don't see the emergency. They don't see the layoff. They don't see the illness. They just see a number. And that number decides how expensive your life will be. Two people can live in the same city, work similar jobs, and earn similar incomes. But pay completely different prices for the same things. Same car, same apartment, same insurance. Different credit scores, different lives. One pays less, one pays more. And the one paying more is usually the one who can least afford it. That's how the system quietly traps people. Credit scores don't just reflect financial behavior. They shape future outcomes. They determine access. They decide opportunity. They control where you live, how much you pay, what kind of safety net you have. And most people don't understand how deeply this number reaches into everyday life. Take housing. In many parts of the country, landlords don't just look at income. They look at credit. A low score can mean rejection, even if you can afford the rent, or it can mean higher deposits, higher fees, less flexibility. So people with lower credit scores end up in worse housing, not because they want to, but because they're filtered out of better options. That affects schools, commutes, safety, health. A number silently reshapes geography. Then there's transportation. A low credit score means higher car loan rates, sometimes double or triple the interest, which means the same car costs thousands more over time. And if you can't afford a car, that limits job options, that limits income, that limits upward mobility. The cycle tightens. Insurance companies do it too. Auto insurance, home insurance, even renter's insurance. Lower credit scores often mean higher premiums. Not because someone is a worse driver or more careless, but because the system assumes risk based on a financial number. So people already struggling financially are charged more for protection. That's not accidental, that's structural. And it doesn't stop there. Some employers check credit reports, especially for jobs involving money, management, or responsibility. A bad score can quietly disqualify you without ever giving you a chance to explain. So the very thing that makes it hard to improve your life becomes the reason you re-blocked from improving it. This is where credit scores become more than a tool. They become a gatekeeper. And the most dangerous part is how normal this feels. People accept it because it's invisible, because it's technical, because it sounds neutral. But neutrality doesn't mean fairness. Credit scores don't measure character. They measure access to stability. Someone who grew up with financial support, family help, and safety nets starts with an advantage. Someone who didn't starts behind. One unexpected crisis can push a score down. And once it drops, climbing back up takes years. Years of perfect behavior. Years of discipline, years of patience. Meanwhile, life keeps charging interest. People start to feel like they're being punished forever for one chapter of their life. A chapter they may not have had control over. Medical debt, job loss, divorce, family emergencies. These things hit credit scores hard. And once they do, everything gets more expensive. That's why credit scores don't just track the past. They lock in inequality. They turn temporary hardship into long-term disadvantage, and people internalize this. They start believing they're bad with money. They feel ashamed. They avoid checking their score. They avoid applying for things altogether. They shrink their expectations, not because they lack ambition, but because rejection hurts. And repeated rejection teaches people to stop trying. That psychological impact is rarely talked about. A number tells people where they belong. High score? Doors open. Low score? Doors close quietly. No explanation. No conversation, just denial. And this creates two Americas living side by side. One where credit makes life cheaper, smoother, safer. Another where credit makes life more expensive, stressful, and fragile. And people rarely move between these worlds easily. Because once you're in the lower tier, every step costs more. Higher interest, higher deposits, higher premiums, less room for error. One small mistake hurts more. One missed payment has bigger consequences. One setback takes longer to recover from. And that's how control works best. Not through force, through structure. Credit scores don't shout, they whisper, they influence. They shape outcomes while pretending to be objective. And most people don't realize how deeply they re-affected until they try to change something in their life. Move, upgrade, start fresh. That's when the number speaks and says no. We're only at the beginning of this story. Because next comes the part people rarely see clearly. How credit scores don't just control money, but identity, behavior, and the choices people believe they're allowed to make. At some point, many parents stop calling it childcare and start calling it survival. Because that's what it feels like. You wake up before the sun, rush through the morning, pack bags, bottles, extra clothes, paperwork, snacks, emergency numbers, and then you hand over the most important thing in your life to someone else, so you can go earn money that will mostly disappear by the end of the month. And what hurts the most isn't just the cost. It's the quiet realization that no matter how hard you work, you are still barely staying afloat. A lot of parents don't even notice when the pressure turns into constant anxiety. It shows up in small ways. You start checking your bank balance more often. You delay doctor appointments. You stop taking days off because unpaid time feels dangerous. You start calculating life in hours. If you miss one shift, that's childcare you can't afford. If your child gets sick, that's money lost. If daycare closes unexpectedly, that's panic. And this is where the system tightens its grip. Childcare costs don't exist alone. They collide with rent, healthcare, gas, groceries, and student loans. When one thing goes wrong, everything shakes. Parents aren't just paying for care. They're paying for stability. And stability is expensive in America. Some parents try to solve it by switching shifts. One works mornings, the other works nights. On paper, it looks smart. In reality, it means never seeing each other, being constantly exhausted, and living in survival mode. Families become roommates passing children back and forth. Relationships suffer. Mental health takes a hit. But quitting isn't an option because the bills don't pause for burnout. Others rely on grandparents or relatives, but that comes with its own cost. Guilt, dependency, limited flexibility. And not everyone has that option. Millions of families are completely on their own, navigating a system that was never designed with them in mind. What makes it worse is how invisible this struggle is. Childcare doesn't show up as a dramatic crisis like a hospital bill or an eviction notice. It drains you slowly, month after month, year after year. Until one day, you realize you've been working nonstop, yet saving nothing. You haven't taken a real break in years. And the future still feels fragile. And here's the part no one likes to say out loud. For many families, having another child doesn't feel like a blessing anymore. It feels like a financial risk. Parents start spacing out children not based on love or readiness, but based on daycare prices. Some decide not to have more kids at all. Not because they don't want them, but because the math doesn't work. This is how childcare quietly reshapes American lives. It controls career choices. It pushes parents out of the workforce. It keeps families stuck in place. It widens inequality. Because families with money can buy flexibility, options, and peace of mind. Families without it are forced to adapt, sacrifice, and survive. And even when children finally age out of daycare, the relief is often short-lived. Because by then, parents are behind on savings, behind on retirement, and emotionally exhausted. The damage doesn't disappear, it lingers. This isn't about poor planning. It's not about laziness. It's about a system where raising children has become a luxury instead of a shared responsibility. A system where parents are told to work harder but never given room to breathe. And if you've ever felt this pressure, if you've ever done the math at midnight wondering how you're going to make it work next month, know this, you're not alone. Millions of families are quietly carrying the same weight, asking the same questions, and making the same impossible choices. And the hardest part is that most people never talk about it. They just keep going. Over time, something subtle begins to happen to parents living under this pressure. They stop thinking long-term. Dreams get postponed quietly. Saving for a home feels unrealistic. Retirement feels like a distant concept meant for someone else. Life becomes about making it through the next month, then the next week, then sometimes just the next day. And when life is lived in survival mode for too long, it changes the way people see themselves. Many parents start questioning their own worth. They wonder why they're working so hard yet falling behind. They blame themselves for things that are not personal failures at all. They internalize a system problem as a personal weakness. And that mental weight is heavy. Heavier than any bill. You'll hear parents say things like, once daycare is over, things will get better. But what they don't realize is how much ground they've lost while getting there. Credit cards were used to cover gaps. Emergency funds disappeared. Retirement contributions were paused. Careers were stalled or derailed. And even when the childcare years end, the financial scars remain. Some parents never fully recover, especially single parents. Especially families without safety nets. Especially immigrants trying to build stability in a system they're still learning. For them, childcare wasn't just expensive, it was life-defining. It decided where they lived, what jobs they took, how much rest they got, and how much hope they could afford. And here's something most people don't talk about enough. Childcare doesn't just affect parents, it affects children too. When parents are stressed, exhausted, and constantly worried about money, kids feel it. Not because parents don't love them enough, but because stress leaks into everyday life, into tone, into patience, into energy, into presence. This is why the cost of childcare is not just a financial issue. It's a social issue. It shapes families. It shapes childhoods. It shapes futures. And yet, it's treated like a private problem. Something families are expected to figure out on their own, no matter how impossible it feels. The system tells parents to be grateful they even have access to care. It tells them to hustle more, budget better, sacrifice harder. But there is only so much sacrifice a person can make before something breaks. Some parents leave the workforce entirely, not because they want to, but because childcare costs more than their paycheck. That decision ripples outward. Fewer years of experience, lower lifetime earnings, less financial independence. And when they try to return later, they're punished for the gap that the system itself created. Others stay in jobs they hate because stability matters more than fulfillment when children depend on you. Dreams get locked away. Potential goes unused. Not because people lack ambition, but because survival always comes first. And this is how childcare quietly drains people, not loudly. Not all at once. But slowly, consistently, in ways that don't make headlines but shape lives. If this story feels familiar, it's because it's happening everywhere. In apartments, in suburbs, in cities and small towns, behind closed doors. In conversations whispered late at night when kids are finally asleep and parents sit in silence, staring at numbers that don't add up. And despite all of this, parents still show up every day. They love their kids fiercely. They keep going. Not because it's easy, but because there's no alternative. That resilience is powerful, but it shouldn't be required just to raise a family. In the next and final continuation, I'll bring everything together. The emotional peak, the long-term consequence, and a strong closing that invites comments and shares naturally, without sounding forced. And here's the part most people never say out loud. Parents don't just lose money in this system. They lose time. And time is the one thing you can never earn back. They miss moments because they're working extra hours. They're exhausted during weekends that were supposed to feel like rest. Even when they're physically present, their minds are often somewhere else. Running numbers, worrying about the next payment, the next bill, the next unexpected expense. Childhood moves fast, and many parents realize too late that those years passed under a cloud of constant pressure. What makes it harder is that this pressure is invisible from the outside. Friends might see a family doing okay. They have jobs. They have a place to live. The kids look happy. But beneath that surface is a quiet anxiety that never fully goes away. The feeling that one small problem could knock everything off balance. And that fear doesn't disappear when the kids grow older. It follows families into every stage of life. Because when you spend years just surviving, you don't get the chance to build real security. This is how a system shapes behavior. Parents become risk-averse, not because they lack courage, but because they can't afford failure. They don't start businesses, they don't change careers. They don't move for better opportunities. Stability becomes the priority, even when it comes at the cost of growth. And over time, that affects an entire society. Innovation slows, burnout rises. People feel stuck, even when they're doing everything they were told was right. What's especially painful is how normalized all of this has become. People joke about being broke because of daycare. They laugh about how their paycheck disappears the moment it arrives. Humor becomes a coping mechanism for something that should never have been this heavy. When a problem affects millions of families in the same way, it's no longer an individual issue. It's a structural one. But the system benefits from people blaming themselves. Because self-blame keeps people quiet. And silence keeps things unchanged. The truth is, most parents are not bad with money. They're navigating a system where essential care costs more than rent, where wages haven't kept up, and where support is limited or tied to impossible conditions. No amount of budgeting advice fixes that, yet parents keep going. Not because they're unbreakable, but because love is stronger than fear. They adapt. They sacrifice. They endure. And that strength deserves recognition, not exploitation. If you're listening to this and nodding quietly, feeling seen for the first time, know this. You're not weak. You're not failing. You're responding normally to an abnormal level of pressure. And talking about it matters. Because stories like this don't change systems overnight, but they do something powerful. They remind people they're not alone. They turn private struggles into shared truths. And shared truths are where change begins. If this resonated with you, if you've lived this reality or are living it right now, share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less isolated. And if you know someone who's quietly carrying this weight, share this video with them. Sometimes feeling understood is the first step toward relief. Thank you for staying till the end.